All right, concluding my thoughts about the sons of God and the daughters of men. We're going back to the main part of the book now, and I want to go up in this last paragraph where we stopped to read that explanatory note. All of this doesn't have to be fantastical imagery, but and as I have myself believed for many years, these sons of God from the righteous lineage in the earth, the descendants of Seth, had looked upon the daughters of Cain, the unrighteous lineage in the earth, and decided to take them for wives, which honestly was displeasing to God. Nothing good came of it. Nothing good came of it. 2 Corinthians 6:14, be you not unequally yoked together with unbelievers? For what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion has light with darkness? Now, one may begin to think, or has already thought it, that I just simply don't see anything spiritual in the Bible at all. Not only, but perhaps I'm also being insulting about those who do see such fantastical things therein, and had even went as far as to compare such things to some pagan fantasies. Well, first of all, I'm really not trying to be insulting to anybody's beliefs, but I'm simply trying to reason the Bible out with the best possible interpretation of the scriptures that I can find. And I'm trying to give the best clues and hints that I can with the scriptures that we find there. But I actually do see spiritual language, just not in saying that the fantastical imagery is literal, but that these images are metaphoric, which actually match with everyday life and with our own walk with God. We must know that when God showed his miracles in the Bible to people who had witnessed them in life, they actually matched up with things that people could understand with their natural minds, such as the Red Sea parting. It was a miracle used with natural elements, and certainly it was one of the biggest miracles in the Bible. Or how about the plagues of Egypt? Still, it was by using natural elements. How about an invisible heavenly army that surrounded a natural army, as is seen in 2 Kings 6:15 through 17. Indeed, a host from heaven, but presented in what's understood with man, looking like man. Yes, God uses miracles, but they are as always within keeping with what we can understand as mankind. But what about hellish monsters and demons and horrid angels and a devil and angels mating with humans and, stuff like that? So on and so on. Can those be proved to be literal as well? I say, look around yourself. And what do you see? Any of those fantastical things? Now, you might say, well, you're going to see they're going to be like that in the future. I say, well, that's a long shot because the future is not here yet. And there's no way to prove it, especially with a book/letter, Revelation, which again claims its own self was written in symbols and metaphors. Let's look at this again. Revelation 1:1b. He sent and signified it, put this revelation into symbols, by his angel. Now, Robert Monks concludes in his book, The Book of Revelation, Erdmann's publishing 1997, with this idea about the apocalyptic book's opening. He says, the revelation is said to be signified to John. Again, Revelation 1:1. The Greek verb carries the idea of figurative representation. Strictly speaking, it means to make known by some sort of sign. Thus, it is admirably suited to the symbolic character of the book. This should warn the reader not to expect a literal presentation of future history, but a symbolic portrayal of that which must yet come to pass. Now, this idea is concluded by others as well, such as Albert Barnes in his notes on the Bible. He says, nearly the whole book of Revelation is made up of signs and symbols. Vincent Word Studies, published 1888, it's public domain. He says, the word signified is appropriate to the symbolic character of the revelation. And so in John 12:33, when Christ predicts the mode of his death in a figure, compare sign, Revelation 12:1. And finally, Robertson's Word Pictures, published in 1932 through 33, public domain, signified, suits admirably the symbolic character of the book. As I've been speaking on since this book's beginning, it's all a matter of how we decide to understand a metaphor. If we misunderstand them, we're going to misunderstand many of the Bible's messages. And one can certainly say that I myself am misunderstanding. Then I say, fair enough. But one cannot say with bold, absolute confidence until they've actually completed their task of reading this book in its entirety, because I am building my case very slowly, and all clues have to be considered before abruptly dismissing my words. I myself have heard the other side of that story many times. One should do themselves a favor then and consider other sides of the story before dismissing all of this too quickly. So once again, we should consider that the fantastical imagery of the Bible shouldn't be taken so literally. For we can also, with such theories, believe the ancient Greek mythologies are strictly true also. That is, the mythological imagery in them, even if the base stories may really have some truth. Please see the book Forgotten History of the Western People by Mike Gascony. And even information given on his website is this website that I'm giving right here, of which he links a lot of ancient people with fantastical imageries that came later into like Greek mythology and all that kind of stuff. It's real interesting. But that's certainly not the same thing as saying that there's no spiritualizing of the Holy Scriptures, which I see as the unraveling of metaphors, nor that there's no heavenly realm of otherworldly matters where literal beings live for eternity, that then cannot be killed, and etc. Yes, I do believe in all of that. I just don't believe in the literalizing of fantastical things that the Bible expresses in many places and in metaphoric language. So yes, I'm rationalizing them within keeping of our own world in which we live. So that's how I see God communicating with us, with things that we can understand, and of how this world actually flows. But there is a spirit world, invisible, with angels and God and all that, of course. But no, our world does not consist of fantastical monsters and demons. They're just not here. I'm certainly going to be covering demons in a future book project, and part 3 of this current Evil Side of Creation series in a book called Everlasting Fire, the Devil and Demonic Angels, a deeper look into the unknown paranormal world. So stay tuned for that. Now, having said all this, I'd like to point out that what really amazes me is that these same commentators who see the Genesis passages speaking of the descendants of Cain and Seth intermixing in the marriages, instead of angels marrying humans, and others agree with whom I did not list, those same commentators cannot see the same thing for the book of Job. Even when Job uses the same phraseology as is seen in Genesis, and with the very same Hebrew words that was used in Genesis. That is, instead of seeing them as a human righteous lineage, they're seeing them as heavenly beings instead. But before we get any further on that, let's go to our next explanatory note for the human righteous lineage. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the sons of God mentioned in Job are especially the direct descendants of Seth, though they really were, since Noah is in that lineage himself, who along with his family had repopulated the earth after that worldwide deluge. However, it's not really known of actually when Job lived in history. Yes, I think he was a historical character, but that's not what's most important to know here. For here, I am just trying to pinpoint that these beings, whom, as you know, I am looking at as to being just human beings, were the sons of God because they had God inside of their hearts. Their natural genealogy not really having anything to do with that particularly, as I've already covered in here. All right, anyways, I am seeing, let's go back up a little bit here just so we know where we're at. Having said all this, I'd like to point out that what really amazes me is that the same commentators who can see the Genesis passages talking about the descendants of Cain and Seth intermixing with their marriages, instead of angels marrying humans, and others agree, of whom I did not list, the same commentators cannot see the same thing for the book of Job, even when Job uses the same phraseology as is seen in Genesis, and with the very same Hebrew words. That is, instead of seeing them as a human righteous lineage, they are seeing them as heavenly beings instead. So let's compare here. Let's go to Genesis 6:2 again. That the sons, Hebrew word 11:21, humans, that the sons of God, and of course God means God, H430. These are the Hebrew words to match in Strong's dictionary. They saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Let's go to Job 1:6. Now there was a day when the sons, Hebrew 11:21 again, humans, of God, God again, H430, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Do the sons of God in Job have to be angels here too? Especially since the Hebrew word for sons, as we had seen already in an earlier video, doesn't even signify a heavenly being at all. Again, as we've already seen. The reason that John Gill expressed, almost in a woeful manner, that all versions and indeed all critics are puzzled with the phrase sons of God, as we saw his entire quote in the first video of this chapter, is because all these other commentators and Bible teachers are obviously looking at this from the wrong angle. That is, they start their premise that these have to be angelic beings. And they do all this simply because of the misunderstanding of proverbs, of parables, of metaphors in the biblical text. Again, as I've already said several times in here, this is exactly why I wrote an entire book on metaphors being in our Bible, of which metaphors that can be traced all the way back to the book of Genesis. In my book, in the beginning, it was spiritual from the very start, to set the stage for books like this.